I can fix the IPF worlds. Here's how. IPF could send invitations to athletes that aren't selected by countries. Enticing, huh? Here's the way that I would think that this would work, right? So, how it would work is the IPF would receive the qualifying totals from all the countries that are sending athletes. So, for example, let's say the top five it doesn't really matter what it is, right? The top five all have qualifying totals, let's say. Not even just the top five, but every single country sends an athlete in a specific weight class. There's a qualifying total, right? And that's how they determine who gets put in the A session, the B session, the C session, right? So here's how I would believe this should work, right? If there's an athlete that has a qualifying total that is in the top five, right, of the current top five in the IPF world of what has been sent to you, right? It's in that top fives, but they haven't been accepted for their own country, right? They aren't the nominee for their country. The IPF should be allowed to send an invitation for them to compete for Earth or for the world or whatever you want to frame it. Pretty much, they should be allowed to compete at Worlds under not their country, but still compete, right? Still be able to break records, set records, and make it way more entertaining. And then there's the aspect of, oh my God, you didn't pick this guy. He's beating your athlete. Like imagine in the 83s, or let's think of a weight class that's close, like the 105s, right? Where we had Anthony McNaughton from the US that was sent and not Keenan Lee, right? And there's a good reason why that he was not sent, right? He did have the higher total technically at Nationals, and then he repeated it at Worlds. But what about the situation of, the IPF now gets to send an invitation to Keenan Lee. So now both of them are going. And Keenan Lee is going to have another head-to-head matchup at Worlds with Anthony McNaughton. And this time, Keenan Lee is not representing the US. He's representing World. He's representing the IPF. If you lose to him, you're just losing. You lost to an athlete you could have had. Way more entertaining, in my opinion, right? And this is the specific way that it would work. I already said the top five, but it's an adjusted top five. So, for example, let's say you get an athlete that would be like on the fringe top five, and he gets accepted, right? Let's say let me repeat myself. You have the top five, the qualifying totals that are sent in to the IPF from every single country in the world. You take the top five, right? If there are athletes from countries that haven't been nominated, you could send an invite to them, right? So it actually bypasses them to be like, Gustav wasn't selected for the 93s for some reason. Well, we're going to select him. We're going to send him an invitation, and he'll compete for us, you know? And the way that it would work is when he accepts that invitation, that new qualifying total top five gets adjusted, right? So now the IPF could send however many are left inside that top five that could fit inside of it. So, like, for example, right, let's say that only one of the top five guys in the world are sent, because let's say the rest of them are in the United States or they're in another country where they're dealing with this kind of issue, right, where they're just not being sent by their national federation, right? The IPF could send them an invitation and bring four of them in, right? Now, they couldn't bring five of them in, because that fifth one would be outside the top five, right? That's my general idea. Now, it doesn't have to be the top five. That was just my idea. But I think the top five kind of works well for this idea. You could also just make it a top three, but I think a top five makes it a lot more entertaining, specifically in weight classes right now where we're dealing with situations where the 93s, where you legitimately could have had 7 guys compete, but we had 2. Right? No disrespect to the people that were in Flight A. I mean, Emil got 3rd, right? But realistically, with the performance that he had on that day, he shouldn't have even gotten 5th, right? If there were really the top 5 in the world there, including him. He is part of that top 5, but still, right? There should have been 3 other people, as in maybe Russ should have gotten an invite. I'm blanking on the names now. Doesn't matter. People should have gotten an invite, right? And there's two other things I want to talk about for this. I'm going to pause the thing. Now, I think the first major concern that people could have is favoritism, but realistically, I think this still incentivizes the IPF to send its best lifters, even if, like, that's not the case. I think maybe instead of it being, like, they get to select who, it should be literally by the list of qualifying totals, right? That are in that order of, like, who could be in that top 5, and they invite them and then see what happens, and then maybe they go for another round if people decline. Like, I know for a fact that if what's his face, Elliot Sykes got an invite to Worlds this past year, he wasn't going to go because he wasn't ready to compete against Austin Perkins, which is fair and fine. But, you know, if he was invited by the IPF, you know, especially in, like, next year's situation where we're going to have a showdown at U.S. Nats for the world champion, doesn't really make sense. You'd rather have a showdown at the Worlds for the world champion, not a showdown at Nats for the world champion, right? Kind of helps that kind of situation. And then the other thing that I want to talk about is how do qualifying totals work? I think it should work within the calendar year. So essentially any competition that is done in that calendar year is a qualifying total for Worlds for that year, right? And again, it works as in if you're in the top 5 of what would be qualifying total. And I think most of it would happen at Nationals. I think that it also kind of depends on the situation. Like, Agata is a different situation where you want to be like, oh, maybe we want to be a little bit more, like, sensitive on this and give it, like, a year's worth of time, right? So you could invite Agata over due to other reasons. I mean, I know she got the Article 14 ban, and that's a different story. But, you know, before that happened, she was essentially banned for a dumb reason by the National Federation of Poland, and you probably would have wanted her to get an invite if she didn't do that, and she definitely wasn't going to be able to come to Worlds this past year, 2026, due to what happened in 2025, so maybe you'd be like, okay, maybe a year's worth of time. I'm fine with that. I think the calendar year thing just makes a little bit more sense for the general invite and the general problem, which is that a lot of lifters are in the same country that are good, and they're just not going to Worlds, right? We're seeing a really really low representation of where powerlifting is actually being taken place, right? And I'm not just trying to say this in any kind of disrespectful manner to any of the countries at Worlds that are weaker. But the fact that, you know, there's usually most of the best lifters at Worlds is part of the U.S., which makes the U.S. Nats way more competitive than, like, the Worlds itself. Doesn't make sense, you know? I just think that's something that has to be fixed, and it would actually make both of them way more entertaining, right? Because, first of all, make Worlds more entertaining just by the simple fact that, like, Nats doesn't really mean much anymore. And, you know, I mean, as long as you get that top 5 total, you could still go to Worlds, right? It doesn't matter based off of winning Nats. Especially in the U.S. where, like, you know, top 5 guys could probably go. Anyways. And then the other thing is that it would probably make Nats more entertaining. Like, think about it. Even if you don't have to win, you still need to put on that top 5 total. It's still going to be a bloodbath for that, you know, especially in a category like the 93s. So, anyway, that's my idea. Let me know what you think of it. Peace.